The silverware clinked softly against porcelain, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. But something felt off. My grandson's innocent question sliced through the small talk like glass. He asked about the $3 million I'd supposedly left him. $3 million I'd never seen. My son's eyes darted away. My heart began to race. If you've ever trusted your family completely, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because sometimes betrayal starts at your own dinner table. I remember gripping my napkins so tightly it tore. The laughter around me faded, replaced by silence heavy enough to crush me. That was the night my peaceful life began to crack open. It happened at the dinner table, one of those quiet Sunday evenings that usually pass without notice. I remember the sound of the clock ticking behind me, the smell of roast chicken cooling on the counter, and my grandson's voice cutting through the chatter with a question that made my heart stop. He asked if my trust fund was really worth $3 million. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. I laughed a little, out of confusion more than humor, and waited for someone to explain. No one did. The table went silent except for the faint clink of a fork against a plate. My son Mark looked down. My daughter-in-law shifted in her chair. The air changed, heavy and strange, as if everyone but me knew something I didn't. In 72 years, I've lived a simple life. I worked as a nurse for over 40 years, paid off a small house, and raised my boy after his father passed. I never owned fancy jewelry, never took expensive trips. The only numbers in my life were the grocery totals and the checks for the light bill. So when my grandson spoke of millions, it felt absurd, like hearing someone else's story. But the faces around me told me otherwise. My hands trembled just slightly as I folded my napkin. There was a flicker of fear, then anger, then something colder, disbelief. I watched Mark avoid my eyes, and in that moment, a quiet unease began to bloom inside me. That question didn't come from nowhere. Someone had planted it, and as the laughter faded and the meal continued, I felt my appetite vanish. I didn't know it then, but that one sentence would unravel everything I believed about my family. By the time I stood to clear the table, the evening no longer felt like my birthday. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. It was supposed to be a simple birthday dinner, just the four of us around my old oak table. The kind of night that used to make me feel grateful. My son Mark had brought a store-bought cake. My daughter-in-law Sarah had set the table with my good china. And my grandson Ryan was showing me a photo on his phone of a college project he'd been proud of. The candles flickered gently, and the house smelled faintly of butter and cinnamon. It was quiet, cozy, ordinary in every way that matters. Looking back, I can see the tension that night had been there from the start. I just hadn't noticed it. Sarah's smile had that brittle, careful shape. Mark kept glancing at his phone, pretending it was work, but his hand trembled when he reached for his glass. I thought he was just tired. I told myself to enjoy the moment, to stop worrying so much. I'd learned over the years that families are rarely perfect. But when Ryan, sweet as always, asked about my trust fund, everything froze. For a second, I thought it was a joke I didn't understand. I even smiled, waiting for laughter that never came. Sarah dropped her fork. Mark looked at the wall. Not me. That's when I felt it. The first ripple of confusion that slid into the air like a cold draft. Ryan's face was innocent, proud even. He thought he was mentioning something good, something everyone already knew. He said his parents had told him that one day he'd inherit part of my estate. $3 million, he said. The number sounded foreign coming from his mouth. I sat there, my heart beating hard in my chest, trying to understand how such a strange idea could exist. $3 million. I've never seen that kind of money in my life. My entire world had been built on paychecks, grocery budgets, and carefully folded coupons. But as I looked at my family, my own blood, I realized no one else seemed shocked, only me. The rest of the dinner passed in fragments. Sarah offered me more salad that I didn't want. Mark poured another drink he didn't need. Ryan kept talking, not realizing he'd cracked something open. I watched them move through that meal like actors reading from a broken script. Every word, every gesture felt rehearsed, strained. I could see Sarah's discomfort. She avoided my eyes. I could see Mark's guilt. He kept his jaw tight, his answers short. As I replayed old moments in my head, the puzzle started fitting together. The new car Mark had bought last summer. The way Sarah had mentioned paying off extra bills and changing schools for Ryan. The look of pride when neighbors had called them lucky. Back then, I'd brushed it off as small talk. Now, every little comment echoed differently. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something deliberate had been done. Something that involved me, my name, my life. I didn't know the shape of it yet, but I knew it wasn't small. When the cake was finally cut, I couldn't taste a thing. I kept smiling, because that's what women my age were taught to do when the world tilted. I nodded. I thanked them. I pretended not to notice how quickly they cleared the table afterward. Later, when I stood by the sink, I watched my reflection in the window. An old woman with kind eyes, holding a plate she suddenly didn't recognize. The laughter from the living room sounded hollow, forced. I felt something shift deep inside me, a quiet resolve. If my family could lie so easily, then I had to know why. Whatever this trust fund was, I needed to uncover the truth. Not for revenge, for peace, for the right to understand the life I'd actually lived. That night, after they left, I sat in the darkened kitchen for a long time, tracing the wood grain on the table where the lie had surfaced, and I promised myself that I wouldn't let it end there. The truth was somewhere in the silence, and I was going to find it. After they left that night, the house felt heavier than it had in years. The laughter had died long before the door closed, but the silence that followed stayed with me like a weight pressing on my chest. I sat alone at the table for a long time, the dishes still scattered, candle wax hardened against the tablecloth. My birthday flowers, bright and cheerful a few hours earlier, now looked garish under the dim light. Everything felt wrong, like I'd been living in a play where the script had suddenly changed, and I was the only one who hadn't been told. The first few hours were disbelief. I told myself there had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Ryan had misheard. Maybe Mark had exaggerated something. I kept trying to reason with the situation, but the quiet in that kitchen made it impossible to lie to myself. My son's face at the table wasn't the face of a man caught in an awkward mistake. It was the face of someone who knew he'd been found out. As the clock crept past midnight, memories began replaying in my mind like old film reels. Little moments that never made sense started forming a pattern. The time Mark mentioned handling some paperwork for me because senior documents can get tricky. The time Sarah talked about how blessed the family was, even though I'd known they'd been struggling. The new furniture that appeared after Mark's promotion that never actually happened. Every fragment started clicking into place, cold and undeniable. I went to my desk and opened the drawer where I keep my personal papers. The folder with my will, insurance, and old medical forms was still there, but a few pages were missing. I knew exactly which ones. The financial disclosure pages from when I refinanced the house 10 years ago. I remembered Mark asking to review them once, just to help with his own taxes. I'd trusted him without question. Then another thought hit me like a stone: the FAFSA forms for Ryan's college. Mark had handled those too. He'd told me that because Ryan was applying for aid. My financial profile might help. I'd brushed it off, thinking it was some technicality. But what if it wasn't? What if my name, my information, had been used for something else? Something that made the lie about a trust fund believable? I felt the shift inside me then. The ache of betrayal turned into something sharper. Clarity. I wasn't just the victim of a family secret. I was part of a deception that carried my name. My son hadn't just lied to his child. He'd used me as a shield, a prop in his performance of success. I thought of Ryan, the way he'd looked at me that night, proud and certain that his grandmother was wealthy and generous. The thought made my stomach turn. He was innocent in all of this, and he deserved the truth. For most of my life, I believed that kindness and trust could fix anything. But that night, I learned that blind trust can become a weapon in the wrong hands. I had raised my son to be honest, to take responsibility, and somewhere along the way, that lesson had slipped through his fingers. By 2:30 in the morning, I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't confront anyone yet. I needed facts, not tears or denials. I needed proof that my intuition wasn't just grief or paranoia. I closed the folder, locked the drawer, and sat there with my hands clasped tight, the weight of the truth slowly replacing the fog of confusion. The betrayal hurt, yes, but beneath that pain was a kind of resolve I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't powerless. I'd spent a lifetime fixing broken things, patience, friendships, routines, and now it was time to fix this. When I finally went to bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered a promise to myself: I will find out what he's done, and I will protect Ryan from it. The next morning, I would start with what I had: the documents, the memories, and a growing certainty that my son's lie went far deeper than I'd imagined. I woke before sunrise, long before the first light touched the curtains. My body felt tired, but my mind was sharp, too sharp to rest. The night had burned away any trace of confusion. What replaced it was something steadier, colder focus. The lie wasn't going to unravel itself, and I was done waiting for someone else to tell me the truth. By 7:15 a.m., I had already made coffee and written a list on a notepad. Every detail that didn't add up, every inconsistency I could remember. The missing documents, the new car, the FAFSA forms, the fake trust fund story. Each one was like a crack running through the foundation of my family. And for the first time, I stopped trying to patch those cracks. I started looking through them. I called Ryan. I could hear the hesitation in his voice when I asked to meet privately. When he arrived, he looked older than his years, too aware, too burdened. I could tell he knew more than he wanted to admit. Over coffee, He confessed that he'd seen strange figures on his college paperwork. The numbers didn't make sense. His parents had told him it was just financial aid math, but even he hadn't believed that. We went through his forms together at my kitchen table. My name was printed neatly across several financial statements I had never seen before, attached to accounts I didn't own, with balances that didn't exist. There were forged signatures, clean and confident, almost perfect. My stomach tightened when I saw them. My own handwriting mimicked down to the smallest curve of a letter. Whoever did it, my own son, had practiced. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was right there in black ink. Later that afternoon, I called my nephew Robert. He hesitated before telling me that Mark had once bragged about my help, saying I'd funded Ryan's future and backed a few business ventures. He said it with the casual tone of gossip, not realizing that those words felt like knives. That's when I knew. This wasn't an exaggeration, or a miscommunication, or a white lie gone too far. My son had built an entire image of success on my name, and possibly on my stolen identity. The shock had faded. In its place came a stillness I recognized from my nursing days. When something's broken, you don't cry. You diagnose. You document. You act. So I folded the forms, placed them in an envelope, and locked them in my desk. This was no longer about hurt feelings. It was about protection. Protecting Ryan. Protecting myself. And protecting what truth was left of our family. I didn't know yet where the trail would lead, but I knew I had to follow it quietly. No confrontations, no warnings, just facts. By the time the sun set, my next step was already clear. Find out who helped him and how deep this lie really went. The answers, I suspected, would come soon, just not from my son. It was Ryan's idea to follow him. I hesitated at first. It felt wrong, invasive, but by then, too much damage had already been done. I needed to see for myself. A mother's instinct wanted to protect, but another part of me, the part that had been lied to and used, demanded the truth. Mark had always been predictable in his habits, so finding him wasn't difficult. Thursday afternoon, 2:30 p.m., at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths and soft jazz that tried too hard to sound elegant. Ryan and I sat by the window, pretending to share coffee while I watched my son through the reflection in the glass. He looked tired, older somehow, but not humble. There was a confidence in the way he shook hands with the man across from him, a sharply dressed lawyer with a silver watch and a briefcase polished to perfection. Their gestures were small, controlled, professional. Papers exchanged hands. Envelopes disappeared into the lawyer's bag. I felt a sick heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes when you know the picture in front of you is worse than you imagined. Ryan's phone rested on the table, the camera angled just enough to capture them. I could see his hands trembling slightly, but his voice stayed steady when he whispered what he noticed. The logo on the folder between them. A stylized H in gold. Hartford Estate Services. I didn't recognize it right away, but something about it stuck. We stayed only long enough to see the lawyer hand Mark a second envelope. I forced myself not to react, not to storm in like a mother scolding her child. That wouldn't fix anything. I'd learned as a nurse that the moment emotion takes over, clarity dies. So I watched quietly, memorizing every detail. The lawyer's ring, the firm handshake, the faint smirk on Mark's face. Back home, Ryan searched the firm online. The first article we found hit me like a cold wave federal investigation. Multiple fraud charges, investor scams, shell accounts. Hartford Estate Services was at the center of it all. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. My son wasn't just lying to me. He was working with criminals, using my name, my reputation, to make it look clean. I sat there, the glow from the laptop lighting my face, feeling every piece of love and disbelief fight inside me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then, slowly, I did what I'd always done when something terrible came into focus. I steadied my breathing and decided what came next. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about justice. And I knew the time for silence was almost over. I called Maria the next morning. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. Not since we worked together at the hospital before she joined the police force. She'd always had a calmness about her. The kind that made people tell her the truth, even when they didn't want to. I needed that now. When I told her what I'd found, my name forged on bank records, the connection to Hartford Estate Services. She went quiet for a long moment before saying she'd look into it. That silence told me everything. By that evening, she called back. Her voice was careful, steady. The firm was indeed under federal investigation. Multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, stolen identities. And yes, my son's name was on the list of persons of interest. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, staring at the phone, realizing that the son I'd raised, the boy I'd once rocked to sleep, had built his life on lies so big they now had case numbers attached to them. A few days later, he came to see me. He must have known something was happening. Perhaps the investigators had reached out. He looked nothing like the man I saw in that restaurant. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. He didn't come to confess. He came to plead, to ask for understanding, for time, for silence. As he spoke, I felt two forces pulling at me, one maternal, aching to comfort him, and one moral, demanding accountability. I remembered holding him as a baby, promising I'd always protect him. I also remembered signing my own name to the truth my whole life, never cutting corners, never hiding behind excuses. I couldn't abandon that now, not even for him. I told Maria everything, every document, every photo, every detail Ryan and I had uncovered. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of release. I couldn't carry the burden of his choices anymore. The following week, he confessed. There were interviews, statements, handcuffs. His wife fell apart, unable to look me in the eye. Ryan stopped speaking for days, then quietly thanked me for telling the truth. That hurt more than anything else, that my grandson understood what his father couldn't. When the noise faded, I sat in the same kitchen where it all began, staring at the empty chair across from me. I didn't feel victorious, just clean. Grief had a strange clarity to it. It stripped away everything that didn't matter. I lost my son that day, at least the version of him I thought I knew. But I regained something too, my integrity, my voice, and the knowledge that love doesn't mean hiding the truth. Sometimes love means setting it free, even if it walks straight into justice. As I closed the case file Maria left with me, I realized the hardest part wasn't turning him in. It was accepting that the truth, once spoken, changes everything. And yet, I knew I'd done what I had to do. The truth had cost me dearly, but it had given me back my soul. It's been 3 months since everything came to light. The house feels quieter now, lighter, in a strange way. Some mornings, I still wake expecting to hear my son's voice on the phone, and for a moment, I forget what's happened. But then I remember, and instead of breaking, I breathe. The pain has softened into something I can live with. Ryan visits every weekend. We cook together, laugh a little, and talk about things that have nothing to do with court dates or lawyers. Watching him rebuild gives me hope. He's learning that truth doesn't destroy a family. It rebuilds it, piece by piece, stronger than before. I've stopped trying to understand why my son did what he did. Some things have no answer. What matters is what we do after. The choice to live honestly, no matter the cost. If you've ever faced a moment where doing the right thing meant losing something precious, I understand. The truth hurts, but it heals too. So, tell me, what would you have done? How do you define justice in your own life? Share your thoughts below. Maybe your story will remind someone else that integrity, though heavy, is worth carrying.